Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Answers from the Lab, where we share Mayo Clinic knowledge and advancements on the state of testing and science from laboratory leaders and the people who are making it happen behind the scenes. I'm Dr. Bobbi Pritt, Interim Chair of the Department of Laboratory Medicine and Pathology at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. With me today is Dr. Bill Morice, the President and CEO of Mayo Clinic Laboratories. This is our weekly discussion with Dr. Morice, in which we learn about updates in the field of laboratory medicine and pathology. Hi, Bill. Welcome back.
Hi, Bobbi. It's, as always, good to be back. As you can tell, I'm not in my usual surroundings. I'm still on the road here in Chicago for the ADLM meeting. But yeah, it's good to be joining you again.
Yeah, still traveling, huh? And you just got back from Saudi Arabia, correct?
Yes, I was in Saudi Arabia and Italy actually for a couple weeks. It was a sojourn across around the Mediterranean, I guess would be the best way to put it. So with a week spent in Saudi Arabia and then a few days spent in Italy on top of that.
Well, I thought this would be a great time for you to tell us a little bit about what you are seeing internationally as far as trends, given all the global travel that you've been doing recently.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly I've got a lot under my belt. My frequent flyer miles know it. There's a couple things, and there's a reason why I've been on the road so much internationally, and that is one of the trends that we are seeing, and I'm seeing personally, is coming out of the pandemic. There's really a focus by countries to look a lot differently at both biomanufacturing as well as diagnostics. And what in terms of, I had the opportunity to join the UN summit back a few years ago, hosted by the president and the White House, looking just to discuss COVID. After I think it's towards the end of his first year in office, and there was a lot of, since it was the UN, there were a lot of countries saying they wanted more access to biomanufacturing capabilities. Of course, there was a lot of discussion about how those investments in biomanufacturing have been made globally. And now what we're seeing are countries like Saudi Arabia and others that are saying, well, if this happens again, this is now a matter of national security. So we want to start building our own in-country biomanufacturing and diagnostics. We don't really want diagnostics leaving the country because they see all those as part of a national security issue. And if someone told me once something's a national security issue, then funding becomes a non-issue. So Saudi Arabia is not alone in this. And so as we think about diagnostics, on the one hand, when you think about all the constraints we had globally around COVID, it does seem like it's definitely moving in the right direction. But for places like Mayo Clinic Labs that we've been taking care of patients in Saudi Arabia for like 35 years, what does that mean for us? And how does Mayo Clinic overall, not just Mayo Clinic Labs, so how we as Mayo Clinic interact with and support care in those areas? And this is the other wave that I saw both in Saudi Arabia and in Italy, and that is digitization, right? So this thought that, well, we might be able to do the testing, but we still want access to the knowledge and the support. And so thinking about digital pathology, the stuff that you've worked on with TechSite, that those sorts of technologies that can be brought to bear that can really help. That's the other major area we discussed in both continents. So yeah, I think that the more we see that, it's going to impact all of us in some different ways, right? In terms of it'll be good. We'll see certainly the level of care, I think, raised globally, but then also the need to educate and the opportunity to interact also become as important as well.
Well, it's very interesting, Bill. You raise a lot of great points, and some of them we've talked about before. Global supply chain is a big one. And of course, we saw that during the pandemic, where it seemed like every week there was something new that there was a global shortage of. But then you also talk about equity. We've talked about how do we make sure that people around the world get access to tests and vaccines. So, there's actually a global shortage right now of blood culture bottles made by Becton Dickinson. And, it's just another example of how our supply chain is global. And what do you do when there's a major outage? For example, BD bottles are used by about 50% of the labs in the US. And it shows the need for redundancy in a thoughtful way to have these backups.
Yep. Yeah, it does. That's a great point. And the other thing it shows me when you talk on the digitization side is all the excitement about being connected, right, and being able to help. But then there's also the downside and risk of that. So I was sitting on the runway in Riyadh in 115-degree heat. Luckily, the air conditioning was on because we sat there for a couple hours because we were on the runway when CrowdStrike struck, right?
Yeah.
And then by the time we arrived in northern Italy where we landed, the hotel, or excuse me, the airport was pandemonium because a couple of flights to the U.S. had been canceled, and those big jets get canceled, and there's hundreds of people that get stuck. So yeah, and it made me think about that as I'm there talking about connected to the lab, and I know something you and I have talked about before as well. So there's now all that kind of risk because the interconnectedness means if someone gets in that wants to use that to connect this for nefarious purposes, they have a lot more potential opportunity to do so.
Yeah, and this particular outage was due to a faulty update from the endpoint security software by the company CrowdStrike. But you raised that good point of this shows how disruptive an actual malicious cyber attack could be. And we as laboratory leaders, in addition to worrying about supply chain, also need to think about every single one of our instruments in the laboratory and how many of them are interfaced with external systems, and we have to ask ourselves, does it have a secure interface? What is our process in the laboratory? And then also, what is our backup if our laboratory information system were to go down? And I think
Yeah.
with CrowdStrike and what happened recently, that really made a lot of academic institutions, smaller institutions, private hospitals, hopefully everyone start thinking about what would they do if this was an actual event. What is their backup plan and have they drilled to it? Because it's one thing to have the plan, it's another to actually know how to use it.
Yeah, well, in a position that you and I have both formerly held as department chair, I mean, but that's when they first started to have institutional policy around the connectivity and requiring our diagnostic manufacturers to reach a level of security compliance called SOC 2, which is like an industry standard. And I was actually before that not so aware about how much the lab is probably one of the largest externally interfaced areas of any healthcare or organization or hospital. And remember, healthcare is a huge target for a lot of these cyber criminals, unfortunately. So yeah, you're right. We have to be aware of it. And the other thing, to your point, we think a lot about in the quality plan, and we check the box on the IT security. But honestly, that's a huge one. And as you were saying that, I was thinking about they were actually writing some people's boarding passes by hand to get onto the planes. That's for 300 people. If you think about how if we and our labs as busy as they are, if we were trying to do manual requisitions, it would be impossible, right? So to your point, we really have to understand our IT security plan and IT outage plan as well.
Yeah, the College of American Pathologists just published some really nice information on cybersecurity and best practices that would be worth a read for those that are interested. There's also been some reports from hospitals that have recently experienced a cyber attack. For example, some of my colleagues were talking about having to run results on pieces of paper into the operating room and up to the hospital wards. It's not sustainable, obviously, and it's a huge impact. So as much as we grumble when we have to fill out those IT connectivity plans, we have to think about the essential function that they're serving.
Yeah, indeed.
Well, with all the travel that you've been doing, Bill, I hope that you've been staying healthy and not letting the summer wave of COVID get to you.
Yeah, I was going to say that was the last. The other thing is that there was a lot of. I have number one, thankfully. I think although I was feeling a little bit under the weather for a couple of days in Saudi Arabia, so I wondered, but then I kind of pulled out of it. So I might have been minimally symptomatic with COVID or something, because certainly the numbers are up, and I know it's something you, of course, keep a close eye on. And I think there's some other
Mhm.
infectious diseases that are particularly prone to be spread through travel that are on the rise as well.
Yes, indeed. We are seeing a resurgence of measles. It's 188 cases so far this year, and most are linked to international travel. So anyone who's traveling should make sure that they're up to date on all of their vaccinations and also consider your standard respiratory diseases, which now include COVID. But we have to consider where you're traveling and make sure that you go to a travel clinic and get good travel advice if you're going somewhere that may require special vaccinations. But at the very least, get the minimum. Make sure that you're up to date on all of the standard vaccinations, which includes measles. It's probably the most highly contagious disease we know.
Yeah. Wow. Well, yes. So be careful out there, and we are
Yeah.
still in the on kind of the height of travel season. So, probably
Well,
good note to end on.
yeah. So continue your safe travels and have a great week at ADLM. And yeah, I'm sure you'll make it back safely. And then we can talk about more things when you get back.
That's right. And I'm traveling by car with Hattie and Gretzky, so I think I'm pretty safe for at least during my travel
Right.
from the main thing will be having to manage them in the vehicle. So
Well, good luck with that, and we'll talk to you when you get back, Bill.
sounds great. I look forward to it as always.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Answers from the Lab. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast, and don't forget to tune in every Thursday and every other Tuesday.